other people can see.
Okay.
But very, very happy to be here at the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences with Chris Flook, and as part of Excel Catlin Coral Live this year. And welcome to this second YouTube live broadcast. Really want to get the most of your knowledge over the next sort of 45 minutes, an amazing amount of experience. How did you, I mean, first of all, if you can just briefly describe your role, and I'd love to know how you got into this work.
Sure. Well, basically, my role at the biostation here now, Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, I operate the small boats for them. So that's basically making sure that we get the groups out and back safely, and then also sort of supporting the visiting scientists and local scientists to get the information and get to the spots where they need to get things done. It started a long time ago. My earliest memory was about 5-6 years old, and my brother and I found an old cooler floating. It had no lid. So what we did was we took that cooler, had it on a dock, put fish in it, and started keeping fish from that young. From that, it bloomed into, you know, how is it easy to keep this fish and not that fish, and why can we keep these corals and not those corals? So there was a lot of hands-on learning, and then I ended up in a position like this where I turned my childhood passion into a career. So
amazing. And so, I mean, it's not the scientists themselves who go out and who are sort of the boat experts and logistics experts. It's that sort of relationship between people like yourself and the scientists who need to get to certain sites, or maybe you know the best sites.
Exactly. I mean, I've been described by a few before as the fixer. You know, we need to find this animal in its natural environment, and how do we do that? And I've just experienced. I've been there and done it 1,000 times and know where to get them. It's easy to get them from here or there, and you know, it's just sort of getting them to be able to do the science that they need to do.
Brilliant. And what's the oddest request that you've had from a science team?
You get some pretty odd requests. I mean, every day is different. So, I mean, that's the beauty of the job for me, is that, you know, you're dealing with nature. You can't put that in a box and make that happen. So, I mean, you know, you get requests from little tiny beasties this big to big animals this big. And, you know, every scientist is looking to try and do the science that they want to accomplish in the parameters that they want to do. And sometimes they don't have the sort of real world life context of, well, actually, you can't keep that animal in a tank like that because it won't do well. You need a round tank versus a square tank, or things like that. So each animal's got its own particular little sort of niches that you need to just sort of work out and figure out what's best for them.
So we're not going to get an anecdote of an odd sort of like creature hunt.
There's one story that always comes to mind, because I always tease the scientist about it, and he's been here for a number of years, Dr. Craig Schneider, who's an algae expert, and they go and look at little tiny microscopic algae on the reef. The parrotfish and things are eating these algae, so often it's hard to find them on the reef, so you're looking for these little tiny organisms like this. So I was in the boat, he was diving with his buddy looking for these little algae, and you know, like a 40-foot humpback whale swam over the top of them. At the end of the dive, they came up to the surface, and just by looking at their eyes through the mask, I knew they didn't see it. And I said, I find you the biggest thing in the ocean I could find, and you didn't see it. But they were so busy looking at the bottom. They said they realized that it went cloudy over the top of them. They thought it was just a cloud. They didn't think to look up. They would have been about 20 feet away from the bottom of a humpback whale. Amazing. So it's those things. You could take people out there and try and show them the things, but if they're so ingrained in their science, sometimes they don't get the peripheral of the other things.
Well, I think probably very true of a lot of scientists is that passionate obsession in their work, which is always amazing to see. But as you say, sometimes
they take the blinders off, look around, you know.
Yeah. Amazing. So, I mean, we're here in Bermuda. We're surrounded by a coral reef habitat, which is where all these amazing animals and fish are. What is coral? And I know we've got a few props here.
Yeah. So there's a few different types of corals. I mean, there's obviously lots of species of coral, depending on where the planet you're coming from. But you've got basically the hard corals and the soft corals. So things like sea fans and the sort of sea rods, like these guys here, would be considered the soft corals. So they, you know, sort of bend and flow with the tides and the water movement. And then you've also got this fella here, which is a brain coral. So this is what we're looking at here, is just the skeleton of the brain coral. So the coral lays down this calcium carbonate structure, and the little tiny animal polyps that are actually the coral animal live on those. So the coral is filter feeding the water, but it's also farming algae in the coral polyps. So they're not just filter feeding, they're also photosynthesizing and farming this. So they're really complex animals. But what we see when we see coral, we see that hard structure, and we think that's the coral, but that's actually just the skeleton of the coral. This is so vital for places like Bermuda because we live on an extinct volcano that literally has a coral cap on top. That's been millions of years of this coral growing up and building and building and building. So things like ocean acidification and all that jeopardize this because it will break this down. So, there's a lot of sort of environmental factors that are contributing to the breakdown of coral reefs, which is very scary, not just so much for the structure of somewhere like Bermuda, but also for the habitat of all the animals associated with the coral reefs to keep it in balance.
And you're talking about, this almost coral in this high CO2 world, this increasing carbon dioxide is causing these environmental changes. Spending how many years on the reef here, what kind of change have you seen?
I've seen a number of changes. I mean, as a kid growing up, one of the things we used to find a lot of the time floating off the coast here was tar balls. We used to get tons and tons of tar. And the old oil transport ships used to have one hull. So they would take on the oil or the sort of crude oil and go to their destination, offload that. Then they would take water back on for ballast. The boats would be, sort of very quite tipsy without that oil weight in them. Then when they go to pick up the next load of oil, they just dump that water back overboard. So you're getting these contaminants. And then also a lot of the ships that were sunk during the war are broken up and that oil's come to the surface. So as a kid, it was quite classic to go and see a lot of tar on the beaches, a lot of oil. One of the things we used to see here was mayonnaise to get the tar off. So you'd always go to the beach and take a little bit of mayonnaise with you. People, you'd use gas to get it from the stuff off, but that smells. But whereas mayonnaise doesn't smell, and it actually works quite effectively. Even
in the hot.
But the big sort of thing that I've seen a change in has been they've changed the way they make these ships. Now they make an outside sort of ballast tank. So that's what the water goes in and out of. So they're not contaminating that way. So we've seen a major sort of reduction in the tar, but we've seen a huge increase in the plastics. So if anybody said to me, what's the one visible difference that you can see in the oceans today that's different when you were a kid, is the plastics. It's absolutely ballistic. I mean, it's gone through the roof. You can go out in the middle of the ocean here, sort of way away from land, and you can still see plastic everywhere. With the project we were doing last year, with the Nectar project and these deep submersibles going around Bermuda, we were at 1,015 feet and we saw human impact there. So for me, it was quite an eye-opener to say, look, here we are in the sub down at 1,015 feet, and oh my gosh, these deep water corals and these things that nobody's ever been here before. And then you turn and look and you'll see an empty beer bottle or a broken container or something. And so, humans, we just need to be aware that our actions are way outside the span of just our fingertips. Our, everyday actions are having massive effects down the line.
And there've been a lot of questions coming through. Is a lot of curiosity about what corals feel like, and I know you're not supposed to touch them, but do they sting? Are they sticky? What is it? Does it feel like a rock?
So yeah, I mean, so the hard corals, it just feels like rock. If you touched it, you would say, oh, that just feels like a bit of rock. If you abrased yourself on it, the little actual animal, the coral animals, the polyps themselves will give you secondary infections. Most corals that we have here don't actually sting you or anything like that. That's why people have never really said, oh, I hit the coral, oh, well, it's no big deal. But what we know now is that, just the temperature of our skin and then the oils that we secrete are enough to burn the coral for life. So the best thing to do is just don't touch the coral. The corals are very delicate, but, with most animals that live in the ocean, they're in this environment that is quite in situ. There's not a lot of changes. It takes a lot of capacity to change the temperature of water 1 or 2 degrees. So these guys are living in this very sort of stable environment. And all of a sudden, you increase that temperature or increase the pH just a little bit can have massive effects on those. But the soft corals, I mean, these guys just feel like thin branches of trees. But the hard corals, they definitely feel like a sort of a bit of a gritty rock. But I mean, it's truly limestone. So, any sort of limestone travertine tile type thing, it's the same feeling.
Same feeling,
yeah.
And you talk about the sort of the oils from your study. I mean, that's as if you directly touch something. It's I mean, being in the water, scientists on harming.
No, I mean, people sort of just going for a swim aren't. But if you had, say, they've had some problems in Australia before where certain enclosed beaches where there's not a lot of water movement, and you get, like, say, 1,000 people on a weekend going to the beach. They've all got sunscreen on that can leave a film which doesn't let the light get to the corals. So there's all these little, there's 8 billion variables, choose 20, the bottom line is that humans we just need to be more responsible with our day-to-day actions. We can't change the planet overnight. We can't change the way things work overnight, but we can make better decisions and choices every day,
Great. We've got a couple of schools here. We've got one, in fact, from Somerset.
Okay.
Somerset Primary here, and another from Edinburgh. First of all, some questions from Somerset, if that's okay. Would like to know how coral reefs in Bermuda are different from coral reefs, say, in the Caribbean or the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, so the coral reefs that we have here tend to be very resilient to temperature change. In Bermuda, just because we're a little further north, we have slightly colder winters than most other sort of areas down south. We're like
more sort of change between the seasons.
A slight bit of a change in the season and things like that. So our corals tend to be a little more tolerant to that climate change. Whereas some of the sort of places that are closer to the equator, their temperature is going to be just warm. They're not going to get those cold spikes. So those, as the climate changes, those are going to be the ones that probably disappear first. In general, our coral reefs, we have a lot of brain corals, a lot of the hard corals. We have a ton of the soft corals. We don't have things like the elkhorn coral and stuff that you'd see down further south because it's sort of just slightly outside of the temperature range.
And does the fact that Bermuda is quite an isolated island and sort of gets full impact of ocean, has that had an impact on the type of coral that sort of thrives here?
I mean, we have, compared to other places, because we are literally that in the middle of the Atlantic, there's not a lot of other sort of land masses around us. So we're getting really good ocean currents and flow and sort of exchanging of those minerals and things in the water. Our corals are quite healthy. I've done a fair amount of diving through the Caribbean and other places. There's some really pretty spots, but nothing matches the coral coverage that we have here. Our coral coverage is just absolutely stunning. You go out to somewhere out to the north of the island, like by the Cristobal Colon is a classic dive spot that a lot of people go to. I mean, the brain coral it's almost all brain coral. It's really stunning. We get visiting scientists come from all over the world, and they come here, and after their first dive, they're like, wow, your corals, and that's something to be proud of.
Amazing. I mean, come here more often.
Yes.
And Isaiah from Somerset Primary here would like to know why the reefs on the south shore are different from the reefs on the north shore.
Well, in actual fact, the South Shore reefs are very similar to the North Shore reefs.
Okay.
But when you get off the shore on North Shore and you swim out, you're still on the inside of the lagoon.
Okay.
So those inside lagoon reefs, it's a different makeup of corals due to sort of water clarity and sort of the turbidity and sort of sea dust, I suppose, in the water. Obviously, the temperature is going to be getting warmer in the summer and colder in the winter in that lagoon as well. Whereas the north rim and the south shore, those habitats are very similar.
So instead of thinking of sort of the north shore and just a bit of Bermuda that's above land, we'd actually think of when you look on a satellite image, that's a ring.
That northern rim, yes. Yeah, exactly.
So it's thinking of that as Bermuda rather than just a hook.
Should I get this off the wall? Sure, let's do that. we have props.
We have props.
But I mean, a lot of the corals you'll see in both habitats on the North Shore and the South Shore, but the slightly closer to deep water, those corals are classic for those areas.
Okay. We don't have props.
We don't have props.
Before I drop this, it's very important. Picture. Pretty there.
Cool.
So what we'll do,
if you have a piece of paper and a pen, I can do a quick little sketch and show you. Just as easy.
But we can see behind us this old sort of aerial photograph, and then when it extends round,
So you've got Somerset here and the East End here. So we might have a pen and paper there. Okay. So I'll stand over here and show you. Basically, the South Shore, the reef edge is very close. Here.
Well, I think that if let's do it this the other way.
This is perfect. Okay, so you've got the island of Bermuda here, and that outside rim reef is the boilers here, and it extends all the way out here. So everything outside of this will be very similar coral reef. The coral makeup in here will be slightly different just because of depth of water, temperature of water, and then the sort of turbidity of water. So when I mean turbidity, it's the
cloudiness,
the sort of sediment that's floating in there and stuff like that. But I mean, a lot of the corals that you find in here, you will also find on these areas as well. But you can definitely see a difference.
So the lesson to Osiris is get out a bit more on the north.
Yeah, get out. I mean, it's hard to get out
further. Okay.
That northern rim is about 10 miles out or so. So
so unless you have a boat,
a lot of people don't get out there because it is quite a ways to go.
But if you were to get out there, you'd find that in fact the north rim and southern rim
very similar,
are very, very similar. Amazing. So I mean, I think that we've got a couple of memories here of the tar, and it's great to see those memories. And that's pretty well gone.
You just don't see it. You don't see it as you used to. I mean, as kids, we would always come home after a day out playing, covered in tar. I can hear my mom yelling now, "Don't sit on the couch" and all this stuff. You just don't see that now. But what you do see is the plastic.
Okay.
And the plastic is the scary one because people can go out and pick up a plastic bag or pick up a water bottle or something like that. But as that stuff breaks down, it gets into these micro beads, these little small bits of plastic, and you can't get that easily. People say, "Oh, well, you can screen for it. You can screen the water." But if you're screening the water, you're also taking out the small organisms that are supposed to be there.
Yes.
So it's a real problem. It's like, how do you strain that stuff out? I mean, the best case scenario is we stop using plastic.
So it's more of a sort of, what would say, an upstream solution of
exactly
not producing or using this, especially the single-use plastic.
Absolutely, yeah.
Two things that have really struck me just being in the water a bit, both last year and this year. One of the things is there are a lot of parrotfish.
Yep.
There's a lot of parrotfish, and the second one is sharks. They were never here. Where have they gone?
Bermuda's had a very interesting transition through time.
Okay.
So the first settlers that showed up in sort of like 1609, by 1620 they made the first conservation laws, which are some of the earliest conservation laws on record. So you think this little tiny island with a population of not many in those days, but 11 years after being here, they realized that, wait, we're eating the turtles too fast. So they made the protection of sea turtles. Unfortunately, they protected the small turtles and not the big breeding turtles, but they didn't know the life cycle of the behavior of those animals at that time. They thought they were doing the right thing by protecting the small ones and keep eating the big ones. If they'd have kept the big ones, we would have still had breeding turtles in Bermuda. So as time went on, there was at one point, like in the 1700s, early 1700s, about 3,000 people left the island due to starvation. They couldn't farm fast enough for the population. So at that point, people went to the ocean. They said, I don't have to go to the store and buy something. I can go off the dock and grab a fish. The ocean, people always stand on the shore and look out to sea, and it's this expanse, anything past the horizon's outer space. But we're now starting to realize there are limits to our impact on, how we can keep this going. So as time went on in the 1700s and people were still fishing and everything else, we had this starvation, 3,000 people left the island. By about 1780 or so, some pretty dramatic laws came into effect for what fish you could take, how many you could take, what gear you could use, and things like that. So back then, they already said, wait a second, we've got this small resource and it's dwindling because we're putting so much pressure on it. We've just had this major sort of famine on the island, but we're still going to put these laws into place because we realize if we lose it forever. Yeah. So time goes on, people still eating parrotfish and things like that, but there was a fish pot ban back in sort of 1989, 90 or so. They actually banned using fish pots for good.
And fish pots are sort of traps you put down on the seafloor, and
they're like a big cage with a funnel on one end. And the problem with them is they're just too effective. So one fish goes and it attracts another fish. It goes another fish. It's just the easiest way to catch fish.
And it's just all types of fish, not necessarily good
not
eaters
species specific and everything else. So then you bring the trap up, the pressure kills the fish. So even the ones you're not going to eat, you can't throw back. So a lot of time went on, and we basically ate the fish around here. So once we protected the parrotfish and stopped using traps, we've seen a huge increase in the parrotfish. And a lot of the fish scientists that we come to Bermuda say that Bermuda is literally the parrotfish capital of the planet.
I mean, really, the midnight parrotfish is stunning.
All down south, when I've gone diving down there, you see a couple of parrotfish here and there, but here you see volumes of parrotfish. And the parrotfish are really important because they're grazers and they're eating the algae off the reef, which allows the little coral to settle. Okay, so it's this, we always think of, oh, save the whales, but if you don't save the plankton, you're not going to save the whales. We can't look at the sort of environment as this one link protections. We got to look at it as the whole chain. The chain's only as strong as every link, but they're all kind of related and interacting. So the problem with the sharks, because we ate them all effectively, sharks have a longer gestation period. Most sharks have about a 2-year gestation period. So what happens is once you kill off and get into that base population, you've got this healthy population, all of a sudden the numbers get down to this critical mass. Once it goes below that critical mass, it's hard for that population to rebound. We went through that critical mass. Things like parrotfish and stuff, we were getting, I think, close to that critical mass, and then the protections came in, and now we've got blooming parrotfish stocks, and parrotfish is still protected here now. People don't even look at them as a food source, really. And that goes to another point of, it takes 2 years, it takes 2 generations to change a mindset. Well, as time went on, people used to think, oh, catch a shark, eat a shark, it makes you manly, and it's good for you, and it's going to stop somebody from being eaten by a shark. But we're now realizing, well, wait a second, that's not quite how it goes. We shouldn't be so scared of sharks. They're not out to eat us, and we shouldn't be eating them because, well, a lot of times they're full of the heavy metals. They're these apex predators that are building up these toxins. But also, it takes so long for these animals to catch themselves. So we've basically done that. I mean, humans are really good at eating things to extinction.
We've got a couple more questions here coming through, and then I've got one more follow-up question which I'd love to know about. What would happen, both globally and for Bermuda, if the reefs died?
You've got to look at sort of the ocean as the heart and circulatory system of the planet. So basically, it gets down to the point of if the coral reefs break down and fail, the fish will die, the water will die, and it won't be producing the oxygen that we need to survive. There's this myth about, the rainforests are producing all our oxygen. In actual fact, what we realize now is that the oceans are producing more than the land. So we really need to pay attention as to what's going on. Somewhere like Bermuda, a little sort of ocean island that's made up of a dead volcano with a limestone cap. If we change the environment enough that the coral reef dies, the ocean acidification is going to increase, which means this stuff's going to start to dissolve. So we're going to end up standing on each other's heads to try and stay afloat. I mean, it's quite a scary scenario.
I mean, and even thinking about that, we've talked about the wonders of the reef, but I mean, I think there's a report a few years ago that the reef is estimated to be worth $700 million to the Bermudian economy each year.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, from all my travels through the Caribbean and stuff, you always have this situation where a lot of people sort of swimming to there is swimming, that's diving, don't go any deeper than that, there's sharks and scary things out there. But the tourists that come here, that are coming to this isolated island, this sort of mysterious place called Bermuda, I mean, they want to see these things. The amount of people that come here just for the awe of we take for granted. It's funny because, we as Bermudians, we go to travel, we go to New York City and say, wow, look at all the shops and the lights, and wow, and this is incredible. And somebody who lives in New York, oh, I hate this place, I'd rather go to Bermuda. Wow, look, Bermuda, you got fish and coral reefs. And, it's that sort of, we're always,
grass is always greener.
Yeah, we always want to know what they've got, and can't be happy with what we've got. And I think, it's just, we just need to grow up.
And another question coming through is, are there any sort of endemic species in the oceans or around Bermuda that can't be found?
Absolutely. We have a few endemic species in Bermuda. I mean, they're still finding things. I mean, that XL deep water surveys, we found a number of species that had never been recorded before. My friend, the guy with the whale story I was telling you about, Dr. Craig Snyder, he's been coming to Bermuda for about 40 years or so. And just about every time he comes, he's finding a new algae that hasn't been recorded before, or a new thing that hasn't been identified, and things like that. There's several species of algae and seaweed that are endemic to Bermuda. There's a bunch of fish that are endemic to Bermuda. And if you think of Bermuda as this ocean island that we don't have freshwater lakes or rivers, we rely on rainwater and reverse osmosis for our fresh water. But we actually have a fish that's a brackish water fish. So brackish is half salt and half fresh. We have an endemic killifish that's found nowhere else in the world, but is found in Bermuda in these brackish water ponds. So you think about how'd that work? You know, the things that we take for granted locally, the bream, the Bermuda bream. Yeah. We see them all around the docks and people catch them and whatever. But those are actually endemic. They're found nowhere else on the planet. So the hogmouth fry is another one. We call it hogmouth fry here, but it's actually the Bermuda anchovy. The end of summer, right now, you'll also still be seeing these big schools of fry. The ones that are brown are actually endemic. They're found nowhere else on the planet. So if we lose those, it's not like we're going to get
they're not going to come back from somewhere else.
Repollination from somewhere else. They're gone forever.
Wow, amazing. We learn new things every day. It's fantastic. How hot or cold does the ocean have to get for it to affect the reef? What kind of variability are we looking at? I mean, put in mind that the international community through Paris and all these other accords have said 2 degrees is our limit.
I mean, I think, with the deeper water corals where the water temperature doesn't fluctuate much, 1 degree temperature difference would be massive. You would see huge effects. I know the corals tend to be a little more temperamental than the fish, but with fish, little wrasses and parrotfish and stuff like that, when we were catching them for the aquarium, we would run them through a 30-day quarantine process. And in that, we would take these saltwater fish and put them in fresh water for 5 minutes, because what it does is it shakes the external parasites off the fish. The fish can handle the osmosis change, but the small parasites can't. So that we screen that water, you'll know what species they're carrying and know how to treat for them or whatever. So with like the wrasses and the parrotfish and things like that are on the reef, that aren't going up to the surface like the jacks and stuff, that have got a lower tolerance to those temperatures, if you took a fish and put them in 1 degree difference, is enough to shock them to the fact that they'll die 2 or 3 days later because the metabolism goes out of whack. So we think of 1 or 2 degrees, wow, that doesn't seem like much. It really isn't much for us, but in the grand scheme of things, it's huge. We can walk into a sort of a deep freeze and be sort of, well, that's a bit cold. But 1 degree temperature difference is the potential of killing fish, never mind the corals. So 2 degrees to me still seems like we should be aiming for about 1.5.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's very, because I feel that a lot of these big decisions being made aren't very ocean literate, and that it seems that I don't know. It seems that people don't understand the potential consequences of these what seem like a really good idea.
And it's really hard when you think of like sort of governments and sort of politicians making these decisions for the environment, and the parameters that are influencing them are finance and lobbyists and things like this. If they were standing and relying on living on this coral reef like a parrotfish would, I bet you their mandate would be a very different. And it's easy to say, oh, those islands out there.
Think like a parrotfish is your message.
It goes back to the thing I was saying, most people, that's swimming, that's diving, anything past the horizon is out of space. But we know from the science that is not true. We're all being affected by it.
Thank you. The question I was going to come back to, which we're talking about the lack of sharks in Bermuda. Has any other species replaced it as an apex predator? And if not, what impact has that had on the reef?
Well, I mean, you're looking at sort of Bermuda when it first created, and the deck has been shuffled since then. So we've had, different apex predators and things changing over time, and without the presence of one animal here, it's being replaced by another. So we're still trying to figure all that out. I mean, that's the thing with science, is that we're playing catch up with the effects that we've already made on the planet. Things that we have seen a major increase in are like lionfish. Lionfish were accidentally introduced to the Atlantic, and now it's been this plague going through the Caribbean and east coast of the States that is causing major problems. The apex predators that used to be populating the reef, like the groupers and things that have been overfished and the sharks or whatever, have been now replaced by this invasive species that was released in and said, hey, there's a niche here. These other predators aren't here. Let me go wild. One of the sort of theories I have is that if we had a completely intact, healthy ecosystem and lionfish were introduced, they probably wouldn't have had as much of an effect as they have had because the lack of other predators that should be there.
And you've been working with lionfish
for a number of years.
A number of years. What kind of impact are they? Because from the outside, from a visitor to Bermuda, it comes across as one of the big sort of environmental impacts is the lionfish. What kind of impacts are those, and what can be done to halt that?
So I mean, right now, we're still like the first lionfish and things that I encountered in the waters around here. I was a lionfish. Wow, you're diving, and that's supposed to be in the Pacific. What's that doing here? So we caught it, and over time we've seen more and more and stuff like that. But the invasion in the Atlantic is still increasing. It hasn't topped out yet. So we're still in the early days of this invasion, even though it's been several years on now. And a lot of countries are starting to do these culling programs, and the science is trying to play catch up as to why these fish are causing so much trouble. But basically, the lionfish are eating all the juvenile fish that the other fish would eat. The sort of the predators and the native things that are supposed to be there will eat the little parrotfish and little wrasses. Lionfish are competing for that. They're also competing for the actual habitat, just a hole to live in, and somewhere to live, and this, that, and the other. They're also eating the juvenile predators that are supposed to be growing up on the reef to become a grouper and things like this. It has literally been, you couldn't have asked for a better poster child of invasive species. It has done exactly what invasive species do. They introduced into a place where they don't have their sort of checks and balances from where they're natively from, and they've just gone ballistic. The numbers have increased dramatically. The fish are getting bigger than they would in their native range. Every single one that we've cut open has had fatty liver disease, which is a classic problem you see in captive fish because they're overeating and not working hard enough to get their food. You don't often see that in wild fish where they've got these big fatty livers. So I mean, it's quite scary. I mean, and it's still unfolding. Just last year with the subs, we saw a lionfish at 1,015 feet. So when you've got the reef platform here, and then the reef sort of drops off like this, and you start to get into that deeper water. At about 400 feet or so, there's a massive difference between the animals that are living in the shallower versus the deeper. These fish stay here, these corals stay here, these animals stay up here. But lionfish, we saw in both habitats. So, I mean, it literally is the poster child for invasive species. It's scary, and we don't know where it's going to go. I mean, a lot of scientists are saying that we will lose certain species of fish because of lionfish, because they're going to either eat them or they're going to outcompete them. But it's still early days. We don't know. The good thing in it is that it's this glamorous fish that's got the venom that's gotten a lot of attention. Hadn't it been a little brown minnow this big, we'd have just looked over. We wouldn't have thought anything about it. Oh, it's just this little brown goby. But because it's such a charismatic animal, it's gotten the attention, which has helped actually start dealing with other things. I mean, some of the work that Reef has done in labeling and identifying some of these other invasive species. Now they reckon there's corals, there's algae, there's all kinds of different things that we're trading animals around the planet, but we need to have a better understanding of how that unfolds if they get out.
And what is being done to, or can anything be done to sort of deal with this, sort of the perfect invasive species, as you put it? Yeah,
I mean, there's been a huge, I mean, the first couple of years when we were saying, look, there's a problem with these lionfish, it was a little hard to get people sort of on board because there's so many other things. There's plastics in the ocean acidification, and people trying to pay bills and get the kids to school on time, all these other things. But there's been a huge outcry to try and tackle the lionfish with a lot of science going on, a lot of scientists sort of picking little aspects of this fish and trying to figure it out, which has come to some really incredible stuff. We've got the guys from iRobot are now designing this robot to try and tackle lionfish at depth. So you send this robot overboard and it goes and kills lionfish for you. And then also just the public outreach. The amount of people that I spoke to years ago who were spearfishing divers here that said, I feel a little bad about going out and taking a snapple. There's not as many as there used to be. And this, now they can go out and hunt lionfish all day until the cows come out. And they're like, this is fantastic. I'm getting back into scuba diving, spearfishing again. I'm going out and catching lionfish, and I'm doing something positive for the environment. So it's a win-win. But also looking at it as a marketable choice. When you get those seafood watch cards, Monterey Bay makes these seafood watch cards that basically it's a red choice, is a fish species that you should avoid. The yellow choice is a better option. The green choice is the best option. These fish are coming from a managed fishery and it's doing really well. These are the better option. Atlantic cod lionfish is a better than green choice because everyone you remove is not spawning out there, is not eating the other fish it's not supposed to eat. And then also by us targeting them, we're not targeting the species that have traditionally been overfished and aren't doing as well. So there's a bit of lemonade in the lemons there. And it's just been interesting to see how it all unfold. But
great. Well, we'll have to try.
It's really good meat. I mean,
really good. Okay.
Yeah, we had some of the flesh tested early on. And it's very low in heavy metals because it grows very fast.
Okay. And
it tops out at only, sort of about this sort of size, compared to like a grouper. It can take 15, 20 years to get to this size before it's ready to spawn. So it's because it grows fast, it's not compounding the heavy metals and stuff like that, but the meat is actually high in omega-3s and selenium. And that's why we eat fish, the omega-3s and the selenium. So it's a unique situation there.
Right, eat more lionfish.
Eat them to beat them.
Eat them to beat them, there we go. So I'm going to ask this as quite a corally question. Where did corals come from before there were corals?
Ooh, that's I don't know. I wasn't here. I'm not sure, but I think when you look at the sort of the tree of life and how things have been evolved and what comes first and what comes next, corals are very similar to, I suppose, the closest thing to.
We've got the anemones and the jellyfish and cnidarians.
They're the sort of that group. How they actually decided to end up sort of making a coral structure, like a hard thing to sort of grab onto and grow from that, I'm not sure, but basically it's that train of jellies and anemones, these sort of polyp-based, sort of stationary animals that say, this is a good place to seed. I'm getting good water flow here. I'm getting good sunlight here. This is a good place to try and grow. That's where they've come from.
And we have just to go on to that, we have this sort of Darwin's paradox, this idea that how come we've got all this life in this really clear sort of nutrient poor part of the ocean, and one idea is that by having as you were saying, the algae inside the tissue, by evolving that way, by evolving these tree-like structures almost, that they can actually start to adapt to these very nutrient poor parts of the ocean.
But also you got to think of, like we were saying before, about the ocean is very stable.
Yes.
It's taken a long time to get to that sort of stable environment, and human impact is rattling that cage and changing those parameters. But animals do really well in stable conditions. I mean, when I was working at the aquarium as the collector of specimens there, the trick with keeping animals alive for long periods, you're catching fish from the environment to put them in a tank for display for education purposes or science purposes, but to try and mimic where they came from, it's got to be a very stable environment. Fish like that, corals like that. They, the capacity to change the temperature of water is huge. So it's, it goes from that.
We have someone who's very interested in parasites, and before you were saying you were screening the fish for coming into. What kind of parasites are on our reefs around?
There's a lot of different parasites we get. Some are not as bad as others. The classic ones that we would see a lot on the aquarium fish would have been cryptocarian, which is this little beastie that sort of impregnates on the fish and then starts to eat the mucus on the fish. There's Benedinia, which is like a type of fluke. It's like a little flatworm type thing. Those were the two real big ones that we had problems with. But in the oceans, if a fish is sick, he's going to go to a cleaning station. He's going to go to either a shrimp or a small fish, or even lay in an anemone for the anemone to sort of sting the parasites off them and eat them off them.
Wow.
In a fish tank, it's very hard because they've got nowhere to go. So if you've got a problem in the tank, it could bloom into a huge problem very quickly. But in the ocean, fish have got these little cleaning stations. A lot of times you'll see fish coming up to the side of a reef and they'll open their mouth wide up like this, and the little goby or little shrimps and stuff will jump and start going right in their mouth and pick the parasites off them. And those fish will know at that spot, I do not eat the wrasses, I don't eat the gobies, and don't eat the shrimps, because this is the cleaning station, they're going to clean me. Just around the corner of the reef, it might be a different story. That fish, you're out of the cleaning station. It's the safe zone, But a lot of animals that do that are actually sort of cleaners out on the reef.
Amazing. So you've got this amazing sort of interdependence of life on the reef. So everything has a role. Everything's
absolutely. Like I was saying, it's a chain. The chain is only strong as every link. But you can't look at it as species-specific conservation
So you could
efforts.
say,
It needs to
oh,
be
well,
environment, you know?
Yeah. So you can say, oh, well, we can get rid of wrasse. Tiny wrasse don't really matter, but in fact, if you got rid of the tiny wrasse, then you get more parasites on the bigger fish, and the bigger fish would.
I think the term is trophic cascades.
Wow.
So basically, you have these trophic levels where
Okay.
everybody's eating at different levels, and if you remove one of those, the whole thing collapses.
Wow. There we go. That's how important. Well, I don't know parasites, but parasites provide food for the wrasse.
Yep.
And everything connects. Why do some fish and other animals migrate, but others sort of have more of a sort of like a home turf, as it were?
So that's a great question. I mean, a lot of these things we don't know 100%, but we do know things like certain fish will spawn in certain areas because of water temperature, and also because of where the larval fish will end up. Down in Grand Cayman, Reef had done a bunch of work with the Nassau groupers down there. And Nassau groupers would spawn on this one aggregation. All the groupers would get together at this one spot, and they would spawn. And they would get together, and they wouldn't spawn. They would get together, and wouldn't spawn. And the scientists were trying to figure out what it was. But the nights they did spawn, they sent out buoys. And after about 40 days, that buoy would go way offshore out to the deep and end up back at the same spot, which means that timing with the larval fish is how they sort of grow. They're released as this egg, they sort of hatch out, they float around for about 40 days, and then they settle back out on the reef. So there's parameters that we can't predict, but fish and the environment have millions of years have set up this, sort of, I don't know, this relationship that they know what's going on with the currents and stuff like that. So some fish are going to be migrating because of temperature. Some will be because of food. Some are just sort of a little bit more willy-nilly, like the dolphin fish, the mahi-mahi.
Okay.
They're just ocean travelers. They're just literally following the temperature and the food. Not like they've got any rhyme or reason to it. They're just kind of doing it. Whereas certain fish, like the tunas, will do these huge migrations of hundreds of miles and sort of do these things. So the tiger sharks here. The tiger sharks, they come to Bermuda. They come here. The big females pup here. They have the babies here. Then the males and the females swim down to Bahamas.
Okay.
They mate in the Bahamas, and then they leave the Bahamas to come back here to have the babies. So it's this huge sort of...
That's a good long way.
Yeah, it's a long way. Yeah.
And then you're talking about, we started off really with the humpback whale. I mean,
yeah.
And they come through at a certain time of year every year.
Same thing. They're going down south to have the babies, and then they go further north for the food.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, there we go. I think we're coming towards the end. Thank you so much.
No worries
for your time.
Thank you guys for tuning in.
What advice would you give to any young people, whether it be at Somerset Primary here in Bermuda or around the world? Two things. One of which, I want to do my bit for the reef, and the second, I quite fancy a career in involving the reef or science.
I would say, there's a ton of stuff online, ton of resources and websites and things you can go to. Obviously, the one here at BIOS is a great website to go to because they can sort of lead you in the right direction, and also the network of knowing who to talk to next, and we can put you in sort of line with the right people. I would say it's one of those things, never not be a rock turner. Don't ever sit there and think, well, somebody else will do it. Just grab it, it's go for it. If you continue to do what you've always done, you will always get what you've always gotten. And one of my favorite sayings is, I don't mind if you don't want to row, because everybody has down days, just don't row backwards. The thing is, go out and just go flip rocks, go look and go try and sort of inspire yourself.
And that curiosity doesn't have to be the reef, it can be your own backyard.
It can be anything, yeah. That's the thing, it doesn't have to be a coral reef. It can be literally, like you say, your backyard.
Flip rocks.
Flip rocks.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Chris,
no problem.
for taking part in Coral Live. And thank you so much for being part of this. Wherever you are, I know we've had 7 schools take part, so thank you very much, and look forward to being in touch with you later. Do send an email via the Digital Explorer website, and we can put you in touch with Chris or BIOS if you have any other questions. But for now, goodbye from Bermuda. Thank you.